The largest of the gangsters shoved the pregnant woman hard into a seat, her groceries scattering across the filthy bus floor as his crew laughed and blocked anyone from helping her. That's when Sylvester Stallone, sitting 3 rows back with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, grabbed the metal rail, pulled himself to his full height, and started walking straight toward them. What happened in the next 90 seconds would become urban legend, a story whispered about for decades. The day passengers on a city bus witnessed a movie star prove that some men don't just play heroes, they are one. What happened in the next 11 minutes would become a New York City legend, a story whispered about for decades, the kind of thing that sounds made up until you hear enough people swear they were there. Let me set this up for you. It's 1976. New York City is broke, not struggling, not tightening the belt, broke. The city had begged the federal government for a bailout, and the Daily News ran the headline that said it all. Ford to city, drop dead. Garbage piled up on sidewalks. Subway cars wore graffiti head to toe. Muggers worked in daylight. Cops were getting laid off by the thousands. And the buses, man, the buses were lawless. You got on, you kept your head down. You hoped your stop came before trouble did. Now picture this particular bus. Crosstown route through Hell's Kitchen, which earned that name honestly. It's late afternoon, the dead zone between rush hours when the bus is half full with the people who had nowhere better to be. Working folks heading home early, a couple of old women with shopping bags, a pregnant woman, maybe 7 months along, standing near the middle because nobody offered her a seat. Because this was 1970s, New York and chivalry had been mugged and left in an alley somewhere around 1971. And in the back, 4 guys, young, loud, the kind of loud that's designed to make you uncomfortable, to claim space, to dare anyone to look their way. Believe me, everybody on that bus knew the math. 4 of them, and none of the other passengers were heroes. Nobody was going to say anything. The social contract had been torn up and used as rolling paper. The leader of the group, the one with the knife, was maybe 22, 23. Wiry build, denim jacket with the sleeves cut off, a bandana tied around his forearm. His boys flanked him. One guy built thick through the shoulders, one skinny kid who laughed at everything his buddy said, whether it was funny or not, and a 4th who sat quiet, watching the door like he was calculating exit strategies. They started with the bus driver, hollering up the aisle about the route, about the stops, about nothing really, just establishing dominance. The driver, a heavy-set man named Gerald, and I only know his name because he told this story to a reporter years later. Gerald gripped the steering wheel and said nothing. He'd been driving this route for 9 years. He knew the math too. Then the pregnant woman shifted her weight from one foot to the other. That small movement, that tiny adjustment of a tired body carrying another body inside it, caught the leader's attention. His head turned. His boys followed his gaze, and something ugly settled over the back of that bus. "Yo, look at this," the leader said, loud enough for the whole bus to hear. He stood up. His knife clicked shut and went into his back pocket. He walked up the aisle toward the woman, and his 3 guys rose behind him, a wave following its current. The pregnant woman saw them coming. Her hand went to the metal pole beside her and gripped it. Her other hand went to her belly. She didn't look away. I want you to remember that. She didn't look away. But she also didn't say a word. The leader stopped 2 feet from her. "Damn, girl, who did that to you?" He gestured at her stomach. His boys laughed. The skinny one laughed the hardest. She turned her face toward the window. "I'm talking to you." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell whatever he'd been drinking. "You too good to answer me?" Get this, the entire bus went quiet. Not the normal quiet of strangers ignoring each other. This was the quiet of people holding their breath, calculating, weighing the cost of involvement against the price of their conscience. Every single one of them lost that calculation. Every single one decided their stop was very, very interesting. Every single one except for the man sitting 4 rows from the front. He'd gotten on 3 stops back. Ball cap pulled low, dark jacket, built like a guy who'd spent serious time moving heavy things. Not gym-built, work-built, thick through the neck and shoulders. He sat with his knees apart and his hands on his thighs, watching. He hadn't moved, hadn't reacted to the noise in the back. But now his jaw tightened, his fingers pressed into his jeans, and his eyes locked on what was happening in the middle of the aisle. Sylvester Stallone was 30 years old, and he was nobody. Let me say that again because it matters. He was nobody. This wasn't the Stallone you're picturing. This wasn't Rocky Balboa with the gloves and the glory and the theme music swelling. In the spring of 1976, Stallone was a dead-broke actor, living in a rundown apartment with a wife and a dog he loved more than most people love anything. He'd had bit parts in softcore films. He'd been an extra. He'd worked as an usher at a movie theater, standing in the dark watching other people's careers play on the screen, night after night, wondering if his turn would ever come. He'd written a screenplay, a boxing movie. Every studio wanted to buy it but cast someone else. Burt Reynolds, James Caan, Ryan O'Neal. They offered him $360,000 for the script, which was more money than he'd seen in his entire life combined and multiplied. He turned it down. He said he would only sell it if he could star in it. They told him he was crazy. His own agent told him he was crazy. His wife asked him if he was crazy. Here's what nobody tells you. The dog? He'd already sold the dog. He was so broke he stood outside a 7-Eleven and sold his best friend, a bull mastiff named Butkus, to a stranger for $40 because he couldn't afford to feed him. Stallone stood in that parking lot and cried. A grown man crying over a dog because that dog was the only thing in his life that looked at him and saw somebody who mattered. So this is the guy on the bus, not a movie star, not an action hero, a broke, desperate, stubborn man with a screenplay in his apartment and dog hair still on his jacket from a pet he no longer owned, the kind of guy the world had already written off. The leader was still in the pregnant woman's face. He reached out and flicked her hair off her shoulder. She flinched. The bus driver's eyes caught it in the rearview mirror, and Gerald's hands squeezed the wheel until his knuckles went pale, but he kept driving. What was he going to do, pull over and get stabbed? Come sit with us, the leader said. His voice had dropped from performance volume to something worse, private volume, the voice of a man who's decided he's entitled to whatever he wants. Come on, don't be rude. The thick-shouldered guy behind him put his hand on the seat back, boxing her in from the left. The skinny one shifted to her right. The quiet fourth guy stayed in the aisle, blocking retreat. The woman's breathing changed. You could see her chest rising faster. Her grip on the pole went white-knuckle, and she said the first words she'd spoken since this started. Please leave me alone. Please, the leader repeated, stretching the word into a mockery. She said please. His boys ate it up. He reached toward her belly. Let me feel it kick. And that's when the man in the ball cap stood up. I swear this happened. He didn't announce himself. He didn't shout. He didn't do any of the things you see in movies where the hero delivers a speech before the action. He just stood. The seat creaked as his weight left it. He pulled the cap off his head and tossed it onto the seat, and he walked up the aisle. His footsteps were heavy. Work boots on a metal floor, each step deliberate, spaced, the walk of a man who'd already decided what was going to happen and was simply closing the distance. The passengers in the first few rows leaned away from the aisle as he passed, not because they knew who he was, but because they could feel what he was carrying in his posture. The absolute certainty that this was about to get physical, and he'd made peace with that. The leader heard the boots. He turned, and for the first time his face changed. Not fear, not yet, but recalculation. He was looking at a guy who outweighed him by 40 pounds, a guy whose neck was wider than his own thigh, a guy walking toward him with the kind of calm that only comes from people who've been hit before and kept standing. Sit down, man, the leader said. This ain't about you. Stallone stopped 3 feet away. He looked past the leader directly at the pregnant woman. You okay? She nodded. Quick, scared. Stallone's eyes came back to the leader. He didn't blink. She asked you to leave her alone. Now watch how fast things shift. The leader reached for his back pocket, the knife pocket. His fingers touched the denim and Stallone's left hand shot out and grabbed the guy's wrist. Not a shove, not a slap. A grip, the kind that comes from a man who'd spent weeks training boxing choreography for a movie he might never get to make. He squeezed and he twisted just slightly, just enough to turn the leader's body sideways, and he stepped in so close their chests almost touched. Don't, Stallone said. One word, that's all he used. The thick-shouldered guy moved first. He came from the left, and Stallone, still holding the leader's wrist, drove his right shoulder into the big man's chest and pinned him against the seat back. The bus lurched as Gerald hit a pothole, and the impact knocked the skinny kid off balance. He stumbled into the handrail and banged his elbow hard enough to yelp. Real quick, this wasn't a choreographed fight. This was ugly. Tight space, low ceiling, metal poles everywhere. There's no room to throw a proper punch on a city bus. It's all grabbing and shoving and trying not to fall. The leader yanked his wrist free and reached for the knife again. This time he got it out. The The blade came open with that click, and the sound cut through everything. The engine noise, the street noise, the blood rushing in everyone's ears. He held it low, blade forward, the way someone holds a knife when they actually know how to use it. Stallone stepped back. One step. He bumped into the pregnant woman, and without looking he moved his body between her and the blade. Full coverage. His back to her, his chest to the knife. Straight up, think about what I just said. He put his body between a pregnant stranger and a knife. A man with no money, no fame, no reason to believe anyone would remember his name or tell his story. He just stepped in. The bus had erupted. Gerald was screaming into his radio, calling dispatch, calling for police. The old women were pressing themselves against windows. A man near the front was banging on the door, trying to get off. But in the middle of that aisle, time had narrowed down to 2 men and a blade. "You want to get cut?" the leader said. His voice was high now. The leader heard the boots. He turned. And for the first time, his face changed. Not fear, not yet, but recalculation. He was looking at a guy who outweighed him by 40 pounds, a guy whose neck was wider than his own thigh, a guy walking toward him with the kind of calm that only comes from people who've been hit before and kept standing. "Sit down, man," the leader said. "This ain't about you." Stallone stopped 3 feet away. He looked past the leader directly at the pregnant woman. "You okay?" She nodded, quick, scared. Stallone's eyes came back to the leader. He didn't blink. "She asked you to leave her alone. Now watch how fast things shift." The leader reached for his back pocket, the knife pocket. His fingers touched the denim, and Stallone's left hand shot out and grabbed the guy's wrist. Not a shove, not a slap, a grip, the kind that comes from a man who'd spent weeks training boxing choreography for a movie he might never get to make. He squeezed and he twisted just slightly, just enough to turn the leader's body sideways, and he stepped in so close their chests almost touched. "Don't," Stallone said. One word. That's all he used. The thick-shouldered guy moved first. He came from the left, and Stallone, still holding the leader's wrist, drove his right shoulder into the big man's chest and pinned him against the seat back. The bus lurched as Gerald hit a pothole, and the impact knocked the skinny kid off balance. He stumbled into the handrail and banged his elbow hard enough to yelp. Real quick. This wasn't a choreographed fight. This was ugly. Tight space, low ceiling, metal poles everywhere. There's no room to throw a proper punch on a city bus. It's all grabbing and shoving and trying not to fall. The leader yanked his wrist free and reached for the knife again. This time he got it out. The blade came open with that click, and the sound cut through everything. The engine noise, the street noise, the blood rushing in everyone's ears. He held it low, blade forward, the way someone holds a knife when they actually know how to use it. Stallone stepped back. One step. He bumped into the pregnant woman, and without looking he moved his body between her and the blade. Full coverage. His back to her, his chest to the knife. Straight up, think about what I just said. He put his body between a pregnant stranger and a knife. A man with no money, no fame, no reason to believe anyone would remember his name or tell his story. He just stepped in. The bus had erupted. Gerald was screaming into his radio, calling dispatch, calling for police. The old women were pressing themselves against windows. A man near the front was banging on the door, trying to get off. But in the middle of that aisle, time had narrowed down to 2 men and a blade. "You want to get cut?" the leader said. His voice was high now, the bravado cracking at the edges. Because here's the thing about guys who use knives to intimidate. Most of them have never actually stabbed anyone. The knife is a prop. It's a volume knob for their courage. And when someone doesn't turn down, they don't know what to do with all that noise. Stallone's hands came up, open palms facing the leader. Not a fighting stance, a talking stance. But his weight was on his front foot, and his shoulders were squared, and everything about his body said the same thing his mouth was about to say. "You're done." The leader's boys had scattered. The thick one was 2 rows back, rubbing his chest where Stallone's shoulder had caught him. The skinny one was cradling his elbow. The quiet fourth guy, the one who'd been watching the door from the start, had already moved to the rear exit and was waiting for the bus to stop. It was just the leader now, him and his knife, in a decision he wasn't equipped to make. I need you to understand something about Stallone in this moment. He wasn't brave because he wasn't scared. He was brave because he was terrified, and he stood there anyway. His left hand was trembling. Not much, not enough for the leader to see. But the pregnant woman behind him could see it. She told the story later. His hand was shaking, and he kept it at his side where the guys couldn't see, but she was close enough to watch his fingers vibrate against his thigh, trembling and standing. The bus was slowing down. Gerald had pulled to the curb, thrown the doors open, and was shouting for everyone to get off. The leader's eyes flicked to the open door. Escape route. His grip on the knife shifted, and in that half-second of distraction, Stallone moved. He grabbed the vertical pole to his right, swung his body forward, and kicked. Not a movie kick, not a spinning heel strike, a straight boot to the leader's hip that knocked him sideways into the seats. The knife clattered loose and skidded under a seat. Stallone was on it before the leader could recover. He stomped his boot down on the blade, pinning it to the floor, then reached down and scooped it up. He closed the knife, put it in his own jacket pocket, and stepped back. The leader was half sitting, half sprawled across two seats, one hand gripping the armrest, looking up at the man who'd just disarmed him in front of everyone. His crew was already gone. The thick one and the skinny one had bolted through the rear door. The quiet fourth guy had vanished a full minute earlier. It was just the leader, alone, stripped of his weapon and his pack and every ounce of the power he'd walked onto this bus carrying. Now this is the part that separates what happened from what you'd expect. Stallone didn't hit him again. He didn't stand over him and give a speech. He didn't play the hero. He looked at this kid, because that's what he was, really, a kid making terrible choices in a city that had given him nothing to aspire to. And Stallone's face did something unexpected. It softened. Not pity, not weakness, something more complicated. This was a man who knew what it was to be desperate, to be broke, to be invisible, to feel so small that you'd do anything to take up more space in the world. He'd been there, different path, same hunger, and for 1 second you could see him recognize that. He reached into his jacket, not the pocket with the knife, the other pocket. He pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, probably one of the last bills he had, and he dropped it on the seat next to the kid. "Get something to eat," Stallone said. "Then go home. Listen to me." The kid took the money. He took it, shoved it in his pocket, and got off the bus without another word. He didn't say thank you, he didn't apologize, he just took the $5 and disappeared into Hell's Kitchen and was never part of this story again. The bus was nearly empty now. Gerald had stopped at 48th and 9th, and most of the passengers had fled during the commotion. The pregnant woman was still standing where she'd been standing, one hand on the pole, one hand on her belly, breathing hard. Stallone turned to her. "You need to sit down," he said. He took her elbow, gently, the way you handle something you're afraid of breaking, and walked her to a seat. She sat. He stood in the aisle, hands in his pockets, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a man who'd just burned off enough adrenaline to power a city block and didn't know what to do with his body now that it was over. "What's your name?" she asked. "Sly," he said. "That's it, just Sly, not Sylvester, not Stallone, not any name that would have meant anything to anyone on that bus or anywhere else in the world. Just the nickname his friends used. Thank you, Sly." He nodded. His hands were still shaking. He pulled them out of his pockets and crossed his arms to hide it. "You got somebody to pick you up? You shouldn't be riding alone this late." She said her husband was meeting her at her stop 2 more blocks up. Stallone sat down across the aisle from her and rode those 2 blocks in silence. When the bus stopped and she stood, he stood too. He walked her to the door. Her husband was on the sidewalk, a thin guy in a Con Edison uniform, and the confusion on his face when he saw his pregnant wife escorted off a bus by a stranger was something Gerald the bus driver said he'd never forget. Stallone said something to the husband. Gerald couldn't hear what it was, but the husband's face went tight, then grateful, then tight again. He grabbed Stallone's hand and shook it with both of his. Stallone pulled away after a few seconds, not roughly, but with the discomfort of a man who didn't want to be thanked. He got back on the bus. Gerald closed the doors and pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, he watched Stallone walk back to his seat, pick up his ball cap, put it on, and sit down with his arms crossed and his chin dropped to his chest. He rode 7 more stops without moving. When he got off, he didn't say goodbye to the driver. He just stepped into the night. True story. Gerald didn't know who the man was, not then. He described him later as a big Italian guy with a busted nose. It wasn't until November of that year, when Rocky hit theaters and Stallone's face was on every magazine and billboard in America, that Gerald saw a photo and said, "That's the guy from the bus." He told the story to his wife. She told it to her sister told it at church, and the story started to move through the city the way all legends move, quietly at first, then louder, then permanent. Here's the thing that gets me. Stallone never talked about it, not in interviews, not in his autobiography, not in the press tours that followed Rocky's explosion into the culture. He never claimed credit, never dropped it as an anecdote on a talk show. It lived entirely in the mouths of the people who were there. Now, you might be wondering, does this connect? Is there a thread between the man on the bus and the movie that was about to change his life? You're damn right there is. Because what is Rocky? Strip away the boxing, the training montages, the music, the love story. What is it? It's about a nobody from a busted neighborhood who sees someone being mistreated, who has every reason to look away, and who decides, with nothing to gain and everything to lose, to step in. Rocky Balboa walks through life getting ignored, getting dismissed, getting told he's a bum. And then one moment comes along that asks him one question: are you going to stand up or sit down? Stallone had already answered that question on a crosstown bus before he ever answered it on screen. Rocky came out on November 21, 1976. It was made for just over $1 million. It grossed $225 million worldwide. It won the Academy Award for Best Picture, beating All the President's Men, Network, and Taxi Driver, three of the most celebrated films in American history. Stallone was nominated for Best Actor and Best Original Screenplay for the same movie, something that had only been done once before, by Charlie Chaplin. And the first thing he did with his money? He bought back Butkus, found the guy he'd sold the dog to, and paid $15,000 to get him back. The man wanted too much. Stallone paid it without arguing. He walked out of that negotiation with his dog under his arm and a check that was worth every cent. That's the man from the bus. But the story doesn't end with Rocky's triumph. It ends with what happened to the people who were there. Gerald, the bus driver, retired in 1994. At his retirement party, surrounded by other MTA lifers, he told the bus story one final time. By then he'd told it so many times that people groaned when he started, "Oh, here's Gerald and his Stallone story again." But he told it anyway, and at the end, his voice cracked. And he said something that stayed with every person at that party. He said, "I drove that bus for 9 more years after that night. And every single shift, I looked in the mirror and I asked myself if I was the kind of man who would have stood up. And every single shift, I knew the answer was no. And it ate me alive." He paused. "But I'll tell you what, 3 times after that, I saw trouble on my bus. Drunks, kids looking for a fight. And 3 times I stopped the bus, opened the doors, stood up from my seat and walked back there. Because I kept thinking about that guy. That big Italian guy who didn't even tell me his name. And I figured if he could do it with nothing, I could do it with a radio and a union." Man, that's it. That's the whole thing. That's what one moment of courage does. It doesn't just save the person in danger. It rewires every witness. It sets a new standard. It says, this is what a human being looks like when they refuse to look away. The pregnant woman's name was Denise. Her daughter, the baby she was carrying that night, was born healthy in August of 1976, 3 months before Rocky hit theaters. Denise named her daughter Adriana. Not Adrian, not Adrian. Adriana. She said it was a coincidence, that it was a family name. But when Gerald heard that years later, he laughed so hard he had to pull his glasses off and wipe his eyes. No way that was a coincidence. Listen, if this story did something to you, if you felt something shift in your chest while you heard it, I need you to hit subscribe. Not for me, for this. For the stories that deserve to be told about the moments nobody was filming, the acts nobody was clapping for, the courage that happened in the cheap seats where there were no cameras and no credits. Hit subscribe so we can keep building these. Now let me land this plane. Stallone went on to become one of the biggest movie stars on the planet. Rocky, Rambo, The Expendables, Creed. Hundreds of millions of dollars. A mansion in Beverly Hills. His name on marquees in every country on earth. But I think about the bus. I think about a man with nothing. No money, no fame, no weapon, no backup, who stood up because a pregnant woman said, "Please leave me alone," and the world ignored her. I think about the shaking hand he hid against his thigh. I think about the $5 bill he gave a kid who just threatened him with a knife. I think about the way he rode 7 quiet stops after it was over, chin on his chest, processing what he'd done, not celebrating it. He didn't know cameras would find him later. He didn't know stadiums would chant his name. He didn't know that decades from now, a bus driver would cry at his own retirement party because of what he saw that afternoon. Stallone didn't know any of it. He just stood up. And that's the thing about legends. They don't start on the poster. They don't start at the premiere. They don't start when the world is watching. Legends start on a bus in Hell's Kitchen when nobody is watching, when there's nothing to gain and something to lose. When the knife comes out and the crowd goes quiet and every person within arm's reach decides that today is not their day to be brave. Legends start when one person decides it is. Stallone walked off that bus into the night, a nobody in a ball cap, hands still trembling, $5 poorer, 7 stops from home. 6 months later, the world would know his name. But the woman on the bus knew it first. She knew it as Sly.